to Linzi's Lounge on pridetv.com.au, and also a big thank you to Globe, who without their support this segment would not be possible. Now today I'm talking to the fabulous Cyndi Darnell, who would not be a stranger to many people with your work in, would you call it sexuality advocacy, or...
Well, I would say sexuality advocacy for everybody. So everybody has a sexuality, and it's something that is so restricted in our society to talk about it regardless of your gender or your orientation. So it's something that I would like to see out, literally, in public more, certainly through discussions, if not actions. And I think it's really, really important that we are comfortable with our sexuality and able to talk about it freely, and from a range of perspectives as well.
Absolutely. Now, if we can go back a little bit in time to young Cyndi, and that question that everybody's asked when they're a child, what would you like to be when you grow up? Yeah. Did you actually say, I want to be a sex therapist?
No.
Or was there something else? And how did you get from that point to where you are now?
I think, when I was very, very small, I wanted to be a singer. And I even had singing lessons. And I think I was sort of okay at it. But it just never really came to pass. It never really came to be. And I think I sort of lost interest in it. And I wanted to be a performer, and I think I still have a bit of that in me. But no, I actually thought I wanted to be a sex therapist, probably in my early 20s. But even then, which was only a couple of years ago, but even then, such a career option didn't exist. And so when you're a young woman, and you have a very robust interest in sex, as I had, and still do, slightly less than these days, but it's still there. There aren't many career options. So it really was not... So
did you find that, because that would have been the 80s, would it be, or...?
The early 90s.
The early 90s.
Yeah, late 80s, early 90s.
So...
Yeah.
I find it a little bit obtuse that there weren't those openings then, because we by that stage we had gone through feminism. Women had a lot more rights than what we had before. It must have been a little bit confusing, like there is nothing in this field out there.
No, well,
for anyone, men and women.
There wasn't. I mean, sexology as a profession sort of was created sort of in the 40s and 50s with Kinsey initially, and then Masters and Johnson in the 60s. And now it is a profession, and it is a legitimate course of study, but it's still kind of shrouded in mystery. People still misunderstand it, and it still has a very sort of heteronormative bent to it, I think, and that really limits our capacity to study more broadly, particularly in Australia. Internationally, in the United States and the UK, sexology programs are more diverse and more inclusive, but here they're still not quite up to speed, so I am really looking forward to that changing. Hopefully I will be part of that change and actually be instrumental in creating courses that are more sort of feminist identified, more diversity inclusive, and really challenging the status quo around sexuality to inform government policy as well. So it's a big passion of mine to get people having more intelligent conversations in this stuff.
So when you were looking though, I mean, you mentioned that what is now quite a dirty word, feminism. You must have actually copped a little bit of flack, like being a woman out there in a world that we're still using those awful descriptions.
I think I definitely was. Look, it even still happens now. People still find the concept of what I do challenging. When I was a younger woman, it was even more challenging because people generally don't take young women especially seriously. When I'm a bit of an older woman, I'm taken a little bit more seriously. But a woman who expresses her sexuality, regardless of her age, is still considered a threat. To what? I don't know exactly. I don't know what they think I'm going to do with my power vagina, but I haven't done it yet, and I don't even know what it is yet that I'm going to do. But once I start, I'll certainly let you all know, and you'll probably know about it first. But I've never really understood it. But I mean, I have been. Even in my personal life, it has sort of had an effect on my capacity to have relationships. The only kinds of people who I guess I can have relationships with are people who are really, I think, accepting of me, that this is not a phase. I've always kind of been like this, and I'm always going to be like this, and it's something that's really fundamentally important to me. And I understand the challenges that women face around sexuality, that even the most empowered and articulate and verbose women still struggle to be seen as valid in their sexuality without it being something that is for the benefit of another person.
Absolutely. And you touched on that V word, vagina, that sort of feminine mystique, what's everybody out there afraid of? And, just listening to you now, and I'm a huge fan of Sex and the City, and a lot of my friends say, you like Sex and the City, but those women, if we can use that sort of term, modern day feminists, where, their sexuality was totally out there. Okay, question one, do you see that as a good thing, a bad thing, or just another sort of American thing?
Sex and the City.
Yeah, pardon me,
Well, it's funny, in the 90s when it was on, in the early noughties, I watched it and I loved it. And I really, really loved it. And now I watch it and I feel a little kind of cringe-worthy, but I'm not quite sure why I feel that. It could just be the fact that it was made 15 years ago and I can remember it. So, it could be something to do with that. But I think what I really loved about it at the time, and I still retrospectively think it was fantastic, was it was the first time you saw women in public talking really explicitly about sex in ways that were quite authentic. And even though each of those four women had a very different relationship to sexuality, through, with Charlotte being so uptight about wanting to get married, and Samantha being completely out there and not wanting any kind of commitment of any kind, and the other two sort of struggling with all of it. It really showed that diversity of, white women's interpretations of sexuality, which I think can only be a good thing. Nothing has come through since then about women's sexuality to that degree. So it was a good thing in its time. I think it's certainly still relevant. It's probably aged a little badly now.
Yeah.
But
the shoes are still fabulous.
The shoes are still fabulous. And the hair, I like the hair
and the
well.
shoes. Because it's interesting, when you do touch on that, what you were talking about before, about, the mysterious vagina, and, you say vagina to a gay man and they cringe,
Right.
they might never have seen one.
No.
And, I have a friend who is an old feminist, and she said, well, one of the things about men is it's a mysterious item to them.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that there's some men out there that think that women have this incredible power because they actually give birth.
Yeah.
And I tended to think, well, I don't think it's as raw as that, and it's so sort of, it's almost Neanderthal, that way of thinking.
Yeah. I don't think people explicitly think about it in those terms, but I think culturally, if you go back, hundreds, if not thousands of years, there have been examples in most cultures of women's sexuality being repressed for some reason, usually to do with a woman's capacity to be out of control and associated with things that are inherently bad in the world. Yet, I was even just the other day watching a documentary about Mary Magdalene and all the different kinds of Marys and what she represented in the Bible. So I'm not a Christian and I wasn't brought up a Christian, so I'm not entirely familiar with the story. But what came through to me from this documentary was that essentially all of the qualities of womankind were placed onto Mary, and she had to embody both sort of absolute evil and then absolute virginity as well. There was no scope for her to sit in the middle, which is actually where most women sit. No women are absolutely perfect and no women are absolutely full of evil either. Yet there are no similar constructs in our culture around masculinity, that there are no sort of absolutely perfect men and absolutely evil men. For some reason women have inherited that quality, and so now I think in the modern day how that plays out is that women are expected to be the moral gatekeepers of society, that if as a woman you let someone do something to you, or you are expected to monitor other people's sexual behaviour in relationship to your own body. And it's like, really? Why can't women just manage their own bodies and everybody else can manage theirs?
Exactly, and it's sort of that damned whores and God's policing, isn't it? That you're either really good or you've been sent to do a job, and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that you say that, because looking at young women today, you sort of get this impression that they're not aware, as aware as, say, any woman that grew up during, the mad 60s and, late 60s and early 70s, when feminism was, sort of the rage and I don't know, from your perspective, are you finding that young women are a lot broader in their thinking? Are they a lot more sort of coveted in their thinking and their sexuality? Or has Sex and the City really failed?
Look, I think in some women are much more comfortable with sex and sexuality, definitely. But certainly there are a lot of women that I meet in my practice, and of course, my experience is going to be slightly skewed because when the women that I meet in my practice are coming to me because there's some sort of an issue that they want to discuss. So I will see that manifest, but I don't think that they are necessarily alone in that. I just think that there's an element of inquiry that they want to go into that perhaps other women will shy away from. And look, yes, some are, yes, and some are not. I still think that a lot of women don't quite understand the value of their sexuality for themselves. We still very much live in a culture where women's sexuality is valued in terms of it being a commodity, and women also participate in this as well, but where, if you're not young and slim and beautiful, your sexuality is not considered to be as valuable as that of someone sort of older and plumper whose sexuality is seen as less than somehow.